Hi friends, welcome back. You know that painting that's been in the background for a while? We're finally going to work on it. I'm going to show you what I've been doing. And it's probably going to take 3 videos to get to the end, but it'll be worth it. I promise. It's going to be great fun. Let's get started. So as I've been doing lately, I picked out some colors from the color cube, and then I thought it would be fun if I actually showed you guys how I use these color cube cards. So I pick out the 3 cards, and then I have the paint swatch sheets that we did together whenever that was. And I use these to compare against the color cube swatches and then figure out what shades I could mix together to make the shade that's on the color cube card. And this actually makes it a lot easier for me because I have obviously this whole bin of paint, and then I can just pick through and find exactly what paints I need. I don't have to pull out any additional paints. I don't have just an entire bin of paint staring me in the face, having me question my life decisions and what colors I want for this canvas. I can just have like a limited number of paints that are set aside for specifically this painting. And I think that works a lot better. I think it makes it a lot easier for me to not get overwhelmed trying to figure out how I want to use my colors and how I want to play with my colors, because instead of having the entire rainbow of color to play with, I have a set range. And obviously I have my whole bin of paint off to the side while I'm working, so if I do find that I need a different color or there's a different color that I really want to add to the piece, it's right there. I can reach over, I can get it. But it makes it a lot easier on me, especially when I'm starting a piece, to have a very limited range of colors that are quote unquote available for use. So I just try to keep just the ones that are on the color cube and maybe a couple of extras, or the color cube cards rather, you know what I meant. I'll have a couple of extras that I think would go, or that I think would play off these colors really nicely, but I try to just stick to, this is my palette, these are the colors I need, and not overwhelm myself. So I have a plan for this painting, and it's gonna take us a little while to put the whole thing together. In case you hadn't noticed with how often this thing has been in the background of my videos, I think I've been working on this painting for 2 months, maybe a little bit longer than that. This one is taking me a lot longer than even I anticipated. I thought that it would be a lot quicker than this, but I'm actually really happy that I've taken my time on this one, because it turned into a completely different painting than what I thought it was going to be. I had something in mind when I started, and it really ended up being nothing like what I had in mind, and in the best way possible. Like, it could have been my original idea was a good idea, but I do think that in the end this turned out a much better piece by my taking my time, by my waiting, by my not rushing through it just for the sake of a YouTube video. This was supposed to be a video that came out over a month ago, and because it's taken me so long to put this whole piece together, it didn't get done on time. And for a while I was kind of kicking myself because why hadn't I finished this piece? It's not even that big of a canvas. I think it's an 18 by 18. So it's right in the wheelhouse of canvas sizes that I do all the time. Why hadn't I finished it? What was taking me so long? And finally I just had to recognize in myself that my vision for this piece had changed, and that meant that it was going to take me a little bit longer to finish it. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with getting 2/3 of the way through a painting, which is what happened with this one. I made it about 2/3 of the way through, and then I really changed my mind with what I wanted the finished piece to look like. So here in this first section, I am just getting my base colors down. So these are not even really going to be visible in the finished piece at all. These are just so that I don't have white on my canvas. If you recall, if you've been with me long enough, I used to paint all of my canvases in shades of pink. I would usually do quinacridone magenta, or I would do a mix thereof. I've really started to steer away from quinacridone just because it doesn't always go with my subject matters, and some of the colors that I've started using more recently, I don't actually like how they look over quinacridone. So with that in mind, I have started laying down base coats, not always, on a larger piece like this that I know is going to take me a few days to get done. I almost always put down base coats like this, but I've started kind of trying to play with ideas of putting a lighter base coat down where I think I'm going to have lighter tones in the painting, and a darker base coat down where I think I'm going to have darker tones in the painting, just to give my eye something a little bit easier to focus on while I'm painting down the line. And honestly, I think that it really helps. I think it's been, with this painting in particular, super helpful because it's a very layered design, which you'll see as we get more into this, but there is a lot of depth to this piece that is not necessarily something that I do a lot. I have a couple of friends who have seen the finished piece now, and all of them have said, that's nothing like what you normally do. And they're correct. And I think that's part of why it did end up taking me longer than I thought it would to finish this painting. But again, back to the base coat, I think that it just makes it a little bit easier on your brain if you're not painting over white all the time. If you can be painting over a color, it just makes it a little bit easier and a little bit less daunting, because if you quote unquote miss a spot, it's still a color under there. And if you need to take a break, it's still a color under there. It's not a huge deal not a huge deal for you to take a break, because it's not like you're going to look at a canvas and be like, oh my gosh, there's still so much white on there. I think that does help a lot. So here I am adding a bunch of trees to the top section of this canvas. I don't know how easy it is to see what I'm doing because I'm doing really small things and I'm right-handed, but I think you can kind of get the gist of what I'm doing here. So like I said, this is a very, very layered piece. There's a lot of design choices that are not things I normally do when I'm painting. I took inspiration from, I think it was 2 years ago, I repainted a fox painting with you guys that I had done before, and it's one where there's a lot of depth to it, so there's layers of trees that are smaller and they get bigger as you get closer to the foreground. I took a lot of inspiration from that, but I wanted to take it a little bit further. I wanted to see just how much depth I could get and how much distance I could get without freaking myself out, realistically. So I've added some trees, and I am adding some ground layer, I guess. I was referring to it as grass while I was working on it because it seemed kind of grassy. And I didn't add another color to the background up at the top because I actually really liked how this pinky brownie shade looked for a sky color. I thought that was kind of a nice, it's either dawn or it's dusk kind of color. I thought that worked really nicely. So I ended up leaving that color. I think all of the rest of the background colors end up getting covered, but that one I really liked, thought that came out quite nicely. And I spend a lot of time working on these little trees. Like I said, this painting took me a very long time. It's been a couple months of me working on it. In the middle of that, I got a rabbit who's currently sitting on my lap wanting to play. If you hear her, I apologize. Not that she really makes much noise, but she snuffles. And I'm petting her, so if you hear petting sounds, that's me petting a rabbit. So, like I said, I spent a lot of time on each layer. I tried to, because with the design of this piece, I wasn't really going to be able to come back and edit anything after it had been worked on. I really needed to take the time and make sure that each layer was exactly how I wanted it while I was working on it. So I wasn't going to have the ability to really make changes along the way, which is not really something I'm used to. A lot of the time, if I change my mind on a background detail, I can go back and fix it. I can make changes. I can cover it if I need to. But with this one, especially with this top section, this isn't really going to be covered, but there will be a lot of detail below it on the canvas, which made me really, really particular in how I set all of this up, because I didn't want it to be something that I would want to come back and edit, because I guess in some ways I could make some changes, but it would be difficult, and there's going to be a lot of color on this piece, and I didn't really want to have to figure out color matching when I knew it was going to take me a little bit. Even when I first started this piece, I knew it was going to take at least a month to do it. I didn't think it was going to take 2.5. But I did know it was going to take some time, so I was kind of making plans for it to take at least a little bit of time. So here I'm just using a fan brush and adding some details to the ground beneath these trees. Fan brushes are generally one of my favorites for doing this kind of paint layer. I like to use the fan brush for doing just grassy ground in general. I think it comes out really nicely. It's a relatively easy technique, and your eye will automatically know that what I'm painting is it's a plant-like shape, so your eye will assume that it's a plant. And here is where we get weird. And here is where I was sending my friends pictures of this thing, and the theme of this painting at this point right here became trust the process. Because I have never painted something like this before. I guess kind of. So I've done the blue cliffs with the fairy tree, but I really hadn't done cliffs like this that were this layered and this varied, and where you were actually going to see the bottom. And it was very scary. I think was probably the hardest part of this whole piece, was just getting, that's not even true. This was the hardest part to date, or to this point, was just getting this figured out, because as you'll see, it takes me a while and a lot of layers. Right now I am using gouache, which is my usual medium, and at some point I will switch and start using oil pastels, and then I will go back and use gouache some more, and then I'll go back in and I'll use more oil pastels, and so on and so forth, because I just could not decide how I wanted this thing to look. It was just a hassle, to be fair. I knew it was going to be difficult because, again, while technically I have done this once before, it really felt like I hadn't ever done it before. It felt like this was a 100% new technique, and I just really didn't know where I was going or what I was doing with it. Rabbit. I have a rabbit. She's a restless rabbit. I'm trying to let the rabbit be free roam most of the time. She's quieter if she's free roam. So, I apologize if I, in future, pause to talk of a rabbit. Yes, I know that you're frustrated because I'm sitting in your spot, but you're gonna have to deal. I know. I've decided her middle name is Bun, so her name is Jester Bun. She's pouting at me. Anyway, so obviously I'm doing cliffs at this point. I spend literal days working on these cliffs. It took me so much time to decide what colors I wanted where and how I wanted it to look and what I was doing in general. I think I had like 4 or 5 different ideas at this point of what I wanted the finished product to look like. I had a general idea of what I was going for, but at this point, I know that I want this to be a cliff, and I know approximately what I want at the bottom of the cliff, but I don't know how to get there. And when I watch this video back, it becomes so evident that I don't know how to get there because I just keep layering color. And obviously, at the end, I like how it looks, but it was a lot of trust the process, which I'm not necessarily super used to. I don't mind trusting the process. I like trusting the process. It is very much an exercise in artistic bravery to really trust yourself with what you're doing and trust your own knowledge in how to create beautiful art. But when you're in the middle of it, it can be ridiculously scary. And it was so difficult for me to just get all of this done and not just be super freaked out the whole time I'm working on it. So I do a lot of back and forth, and I do a lot of texting pictures to a couple of my trusted friends and just saying, I'm not crazy, right? Like this looks like it's going somewhere. And everybody agreed that it looked like it was going somewhere and that it was very trust the process. And one of my very best friends just looked at it and told me, you're going to make something really cool out of this. Trust yourself. It's going to be really cool. And he said he couldn't wait to see what I did with it. And I think at that point, I really got more gumption to figure it out for myself and honestly kind of decide what I was going to do with it. And obviously you guys have kind of sort of seen what it looks like a little bit farther on than this because it's been sitting in the background for a couple of videos at this point. But this was interesting. I think that so the blue cliff came together really easily and really smoothly, but I also had a reference photo for that was super helpful. And for this one, aside from the characters that'll get put in at the end, I'm not using a reference. I'm using my brain. And again, that kind of trust the process can just be really difficult and kind of terrifying. So I am having to remember what cliffs look like. I'm having to keep in my head this idea of what cliffs look like and what I want this piece to look like at the end. And honestly, it was hard. I will not lie and say that this was one of the easiest pieces I've ever worked on. This was probably in the top 5 hardest, just because I was having to trust the process. I was having to do a lot that I really hadn't had to do before, most of which was just trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. And I hope that you guys can also see where I'm starting to get a little bit more confidence in my color laying. And that's also where I made a kind of grievous error here. And that is that I layered gouache and oil pastels. And those are 2 different mediums that you can layer in one direction and not in the other. So you can put down gouache and put oil pastel over the top. You can put gouache over the top of that, but you shouldn't, because it can scrape off the canvas because there's oil pastel down there, and oil pastel does not dry. So I have a whole section of this canvas that is fugitive and that will become an absolute pain in the butt later down the line, because there will be stuff at the bottom that is going to come up over the edge of these cliffs, or the bottom of these cliffs rather, and is going to frustrate me. And in the moment, I don't know what I was thinking. I think in my head, this whole section was just going to be oil pastels, because I had done so much oil pastel on the blue cliff painting, and that was just incorrect and a bad idea, and I really don't know what I was thinking. So as you can see here, I'm doing oil pastels, and one of the next things you're going to see me do is put a wash of gouache over the top. And it does kind of become the bane of my existence while I work on this painting for a little while, but as always, it does work out. It's okay. There are sections of the painting that I really don't like because I did this, but it'll be fine. once the varnish is on, it'll be safe. It'll be lovely. But here I am putting gouache. And I'm not quite doing the wash yet. I am adding some paint at the bottom because I recognized here that this whole section that I was hoping to be oil pastel needed to have at least a little bit more paint down on it for it to have all the colors that I wanted in this section. So paint it is. And I don't know, I just wish that I had done this section differently, and I didn't. So here's a video evidence that sometimes you just make some really weird errors and keep having to tell yourself just to trust the process and that it'll get better in time. Because it did. It looks great at the end. But I am going to leave you guys on a bit of a cliffhanger. Get it? Get it? Because we're going to add a wash over this oil pastel that's going to really mute those colors and make it a little closer to what I was wanting. So in that regard, adding the wash was a good idea. But that's all we're going to do for this video. And in a couple of weeks, we'll come back and I will show you where we go from here, because it is a journey on this piece. Let me tell you, it is a journey. So we're going to take the next, I don't know, month and a half, and we will see what becomes of this very unique painting. And trust me, it is just a lesson in trusting the process. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you in a couple weeks with part 2.